when we played this in New York, and we did it quite a few times. We toured it, and it was a very expensive piece to do because to transport a harp and all that percussion equipment and a tambura. In fact, I think the cost of the musicians was half the cost of the concert because that was renting all the equipment for the concert. So that piece was the second piece that Hovhaness wrote for me. The first piece, I met him in 1970. I played a very short work of his called "O Lady Moon." It was a Japanese miscellany, and it was a song written for soprano, clarinet, and piano. And it was written for Sandra Antonini. Now, that name doesn't ring a bell to most people. Her husband was Antonini, who was the conductor of the CBS Symphony Orchestra after Bruno Volta stepped down as the conductor, Alfredo Antonini. And Hovhaness wrote his Easter cantata for Antonini and CBS. He had a lot of commissions at CBS in the 50s. And Sandra was a very fine soprano, and she used to perform Shepherd on the Rock to Herr Optum Felsen on many of her concerts. And she needed an encore piece, and he wrote this 4-minute Japanese miscellany for her, and she used it as an encore piece. And I heard about the piece. It's published by E.B. Marks, and I bought the music, and the soprano that I was working with from Marlborough, Kate Herney, she knew the piece, and we performed it in the fall. And the following summer, I was studying in 1970 in Salzburg with the clarinetist Rudolf Yettel. And I'm sure some people studied the Yettel studies. He was a wonderful, wonderful clarinetist and a wonderful teacher and a great musician. And I loved that summer working with him. And I received a package at the American Express office, and it was the 25-minute work, Saturn, which was the first work that I recorded on Hovhaness's label, Poseidon Society. And that work is like on the 3rd or 4th printing. Thousands of copies have sold and is performed worldwide. And it was inspired by the Shepherd on the Rock and that little short Japanese miscellany. And it's a very existential type of work. And when I traveled with Alan, he was a very cosmic kind of person. He was not into astrology, he was into astronomy. And he literally had dreams and visions of hearing the sounds of the different rings around Saturn. And he tried to create that in a musical tapestry. And I remember we did the work once for a benefit for WBAI. In those days it was called the Free Music Store. It was kind of like, you know, a very liberal radio show. And they had concerts once a month, and the electronic composer Eric Salzman was in charge of the concerts. And there must have been about 300 people from Greenwich Village at the concert. And when we finished playing Saturn, the whole audience went, wow. Well, yeah, that was kind of the language of the 60s, you know. And Hovhaness was treated like a hero at the concert. And at those events, you know, I had the opportunity to meet, like John Cage would show up at the concert, and Lou Harris, and all that genre of contemporary composers from that era. And in fact, it was John Cage and Lou Harrison that asked Virgil Thompson, the great composer, critic for the New York Herald Tribune, to come here and review Alan's debut concert, like in 1942 in Town Hall. And Virgil Thompson just went absolutely, you know, he just couldn't find enough superlatives to talk about this new music that he was hearing. And I used to go up to visit Virgil Thompson at his apartment at the Chelsea Hotel. And it was unbelievable to go up there, because you go up there and the first thing you would see is him and Gertrude Stein. He was a roommate with Gertrude Stein, and they collaborated on the Great American Opera, which was really the beginning of feminism, ladies, the mother of us all. Gertrude Stein was Nadia Boulanger's good friend and Stravinsky's good friend near the Sorbonne. And when they were writing all of that music, she was in the middle of it. She influenced. It was not like the writers over here and the musicians over here and the artists over here and the choreographers over. They all were one. And that's where I always use the expression, the Jamaican expression, everything is everything in everything. There's no separation between anything. I know there's somebody says that 5 separations of whatever that thing is, you know. But everything is connected. And they used to meet in the same restaurant. I only remember I wish Philippe Coupé was here. 18 Rue Vanneau, near Rue Les Chardets. And you would see on the wooden benches in this coffee house, initials, E.H. carved into the wooden chairs. Hemingway. G.S. Gertrude Stein, etc., etc., etc. And it was Virgil Thompson, by the way, who made Edith Piaf accepted in America. If it wasn't for Virgil Thompson's staunch supporting of her, she would have not been the superstar that she became. He was just in love with the little sparrow. La Vie en Rose, did anybody see that movie? Fantastic, something you should see. And there's a song that has a big clarinet solo in it too. And her pianist, Scotto, introduced me to that song. La Bohème, the Bohemian, and has a big accordion solo in it. It's really a beautiful song. So that's a little flavor of the times, and Hovhaness was in the center of all of that artistic milieu. And then I had, you know, it was very exciting because I was like 23 years old, and I was walking down the street with him one day, and Andre Castellanos was there, and he just commissioned And God Created Whales. And Hovhaness said to me, I don't like the idea that I have to use Dr. Roger Payne's sounds of the humpback whales. I want to do it with instruments. And Castellanos says, I'm paying for the commission. You're going to be using the tape sounds of the whales. Because whales, you know, these sounds were from outside of the Isle of Wight all the way to Long Island. They talk to each other across the ocean. If you read anything about it, it's amazing. And they don't speak in a choppy sound. It sounds of a song. And that's how the songs of the humpback whale came to be so popular in the 70s. It was a result of the environmental movement that started in the 60s and the first Earth Day, and the whole world kind of, you know, got onto that whole consciousness. And
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Good. And I asked Joshua to give me a little kick when I spend a little too much time on one area. So the final work that was the Talin Concerto. That's published by Associated Music Publishers. It was written several months before his most famous piece, Mysterious Mountain. I'm sure everybody's heard of Mysterious Mountain, the Chicago Symphony recording. And that's an interesting, the Talin was written 6 months before Mysterious Mountain. It's very much in that style, and it was originally written for viola. And I got hired to do 3 concerti with the Rome Symphony Orchestra. And 1 week before I was going over there to record the symphonies, the producer called me up and says, there's 20 albums being produced for this series, and one side of an LP is blank. Would you like to record another concerto? Like what you had to do last night so well. And I said, what should I do? Well, I had it tucked in the back of my head. I saw the viola concerto at Associated Music, and it always was in the back of my mind that it lied just about in the clarinet range, and it was in that modal polyphonic style. And I called Alan up that afternoon and said, what do you think of the idea of making a clarinet version of the viola concerto? Since Brahms made a viola version of the clarinet sonatas, it's legit. And he says, if it was good enough for Brahms, and it lies, let me think about it. Next day he calls me up, and the part was in the mail. And then a few days later, I flew over to Rome, and the musicians never heard Hovhaness in Italy. And they were just absolutely in love. They call it con spirituale. All the musicians, you know, serpentante. There's a couple of spots where the second movement is like, you know, right out of like a fusion of the Middle East and Armenian modal music. So those are the 3 works, and I would just like to say a couple other things, and I'm going to move on. Just so you're aware of this, Hovhaness was so popular in the music scene in New York that some of the greats from pop music, folk music, rock music, dedicated albums to Hovhaness, and nobody knows this information. How many people have ever listened to a Carlos Santana album? Look up the album Oneness. It's called Oneness Transformation Symphony. It's dedicated to Alan Hovhaness. Carlos Santana. And he goes into a jam on Mysterious Mountain. And when Santa took it out, you know, and Hovhaness liked it. It was strange, he was strange. Another person that loved his music, because in the 1950s, Alan toured for a year with Uday Shankar, the great dancer in South India. And they used to play concerts, the 2 of them, for like 10,000 people from the top of a mountain. And the people were so poor, all they did was pray and chant, and they would play one raga and improvise on it for a whole day. He made a book of these ragas called 72 Carnatic Indian Ragas for clarinet. I have it. And I practiced those scales, because they're 7-tone scales with glissandos between notes, and that's the mystery of the meaning behind these ragas. And every raga has a name, and it stands for a little town in South India, because it just has a certain bend between 2 notes, and over there, everybody knows which raga it is. It frees you up. And I did that, and then you come back to Western scales, and they become fresh. And I hope in the future to be able to get that book out, and he wrote about 40 pieces out of the 72 different Carnatic ragas with like 4 or 5 line songs based on each raga. But you'll never remember how to pronounce the names of the ragas because there's 20 to 30 letters in the name of every raga. You know, it's just amazing. So that kind of brings me to the next composer, but I would like to just show, did we show over here, this is Alan Hovhaness. He's about in his late 70s here, and that's the way he always had his tie. It was always, you know, not connected, and he was just like he was just an amazing personality. He could recite Shakespeare by memory. You know, just when someone's a genius, you know, they can do things that us mortals just can't do. You know, it was just unbelievable. You know, he could play a Schubert A major sonata, and they would realize halfway through the movement, oh, that's the wrong key, and he would just go over to the next key. And that's a picture when we did the second performance of Saturn. That's the young soprano Lucy Shelton and Peter Vasquez. And that's a picture of Alan and I in studios at Carroll Studios. It was from a picture the New York Times took from an interview they did on us. And is there any questions regarding Hovhaness that anybody would like to ask me before I move on? Come on, I know somebody has a secret question that you want to ask. This is your chance.
I
Yes.
had one of his pieces, and I noticed that all the notes are real low for the clarinet. That's what got me interested in him. Just I don't know anything about him until today. You know.
Well, it's a very good point you brought up, because he wanted you to, he believed in that Eastern philosophy where there's the drone. So the low note sets up the overtones on every instrument. And he wanted those notes emphasized to create a richness of texture. And inside every low note is every high note. So if you don't have a very good lower register, you're not going to have a very good high register, because every high note comes out of a low note. It's just theory of overtones, physics. And he was not into experimental ranges and that kind of a thing. Anybody else have anything?